The House That Waited. Chapter 1. Whispers on Wexler Street. At the far end of Wexler Street, where the road began to crumble into dirt and weeds pressed stubbornly through cracked asphalt, stood the house. No one could recall its construction. The oldest residents insisted it had always been there, though they never said this with much conviction. Their eyes would flicker away, as though avoiding the weight of their own words. It was a tall, narrow house, with weather-beaten boards and a porch that sagged like an exhausted sigh. The chimneys leaned together at odd angles, like bent fingers, and the roof carried the heaviness of years that never seemed to pass. Trees crowded in close, their branches scraping across the siding with each gust of wind, as though eager to touch it. In summer, the shadows seemed to cling to the eaves long after sunset. In winter, snow refused to settle on the roof, sliding off as if the structure itself rejected the burden. Children made a game of running up the front steps to slap the door before fleeing back down the street, shrieking with nervous laughter. Few dared to linger more than a moment, for even in daylight the house had a presence. Its windows, tall and narrow, reflected the sky in shades darker than the day around them. If you stared too long, you could convince yourself something shifted just beyond the glass, as if the house blinked. "Don't look at it too long," old Mrs. Whitcomb would warn the children's school, shaking her cane in their direction. She lived in the nearest house, and from her bedroom window she claimed to hear things at night. Low murmurs like voices caught between the walls. "It'll notice you if you stare." Her warnings only added fuel to the children's dares. They whispered stories of pale figures pressed against the upstairs windows, of the smell of smoke that lingered in the air, though no fire had ever burned there. Some claimed to hear faint music if they stood by the iron gate at night, a lilting tune, like a lullaby played on broken strings. The adults pretended not to notice the house at all. They passed it quickly on their way into town, heads bent, conversations carefully steered elsewhere. Yet even they could not deny the disappearances. A traveler here, a drunkard there, a boy who wandered too close one autumn night and never came home. There was never a trace, only whispers. Still, the house stood silent, waiting. And in the long stretch of summer evenings, when dusk bled slowly into night, neighbors swore they saw a flicker of light in the upstairs window. A candle's glow, here for an instant, gone the next. Some claimed it was a reflection, a trick of tired eyes. Others turned away before the thought could take hold. If the house was empty, who carried the flame? Wexler Street learned to live with its shadow. The house became a fact, like the sagging trees or the bend in the road. But beneath the surface of the town's daily rhythm, it lingered. An ache, an itch, a hum no one could quite silence. For the house was patient, and patience is a dangerous thing. Chapter 2. The Dare. It began, as most foolish things do, with a boast. 3 teenagers lounged on the curb outside a corner store one muggy August evening, the kind of night when the air felt thick and heavy with the promise of rain. They were restless, too old for childish games, too young to silence the gnawing hunger for proving themselves. "You wouldn't last 5 minutes inside," said Marcus, tall and wiry, with a smirk sharp enough to cut. He tossed a stone into the street, where it skittered against the broken pavement. "I'd last longer than you," retorted Claire. She crossed her arms and met his grin with a glare. Her voice carried that edge between defiance and doubt, the line every dare balances on. Tom shuffled his sneakers nervously. "Nobody lasts in there. That's the point. My cousin said his friend went in once and—" "Your cousin's friend probably made it up." Marcus waved him off. "Everyone's got some story, but nobody's ever proven anything. That's what makes it lame. Claire raised an eyebrow. So what? You want proof? Go ahead. Door's wide open, isn't it? Marcus's grin faltered for half a second, just long enough for Claire to notice. He straightened, brushing dust from his jeans. Fine, I will. But I'm not going in alone. You two are coming too. Tom's stomach lurched. What if Mrs. Whitcomb sees us? She'll tell my mom. Mrs. Whitcomb's probably asleep. And even if she isn't, she won't come out. She never leaves that window of hers. The house loomed at the end of Wexler Street, its silhouette a jagged shadow against the bruised sky. From where they stood, it looked almost watchful, as though it had overheard every word of their argument. By the time the three reached the rusted gate, Tom's mouth was dry. Claire pushed it open with a squeal of hinges, and the sound seemed too loud in the thick air. The overgrown yard was littered with fallen branches, weeds taller than Tom's knees. The porch steps sagged under Marcus's weight as he swaggered forward. See? Marcus said, though his voice was lower now, cautious. Nothing to it. Claire stepped up beside him. She tilted her chin defiantly at the door, its paint curled and cracked like old bark. Ladies first? Not a chance, Marcus muttered, but his hand was already reaching for the knob. It turned far too easily. The door swung inward with a groan that vibrated in their bones. Warm air spilled out, smelling faintly of polish and candle wax, though no light shone from within. Tom whispered, "It's waiting for us." Neither Marcus nor Claire laughed, and with a quick glance between them, one last silent challenge, they crossed the threshold together. Chapter 3. The First Night. The air inside was warmer than it should have been. Not stale, not heavy with dust or mold, but warm, like the lingering heat of a hearth fire that had burned out hours ago. The floorboards creaked underfoot, though not with the frailty of rot. It was more like a sigh, deep and slow, as if the house were adjusting to new company. Tom lingered on the threshold, his sneakers barely inside. We shouldn't be here." His whisper seemed too loud in the vast quiet. Marcus glanced back at him. "Relax, it's just wood and nails." But his voice lacked its usual swagger. He too was looking around uneasily. The entry hall stretched longer than it had appeared from outside, lined with faded wallpaper patterned in vines that twisted upward. The vines seemed almost to shift in the lamplight, their curling leaves caught mid-motion. Claire stepped forward first. Her shoes clicked softly on the polished wood floor. She brushed her hand along the banister of the staircase, surprised at the smoothness of the rail. "There's no dust," she murmured. Tom's eyes darted everywhere at once. That's not possible. Nobody lives here." "Maybe somebody does," Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. The parlor opened to their left. Chairs were arranged neatly around a small table, as though waiting for a conversation to begin. A clock on the mantel ticked steadily, each sound sharp in the silence. Claire ran her finger along its brass edge. Not a speck of dust clung to her fingertip. Marcus gave a forced chuckle. "Guess the ghosts are tidy." But as he spoke, a floorboard upstairs gave a long, slow creak. All three froze. Tom's breath hitched. "Did you—" "Old houses make noise," Marcus cut in quickly. Too quickly. Claire's eyes narrowed. "Old houses don't polish the furniture or keep the clocks wound." They stood in silence, listening. The tick of the clock seemed to grow louder, beating in time with their hearts. Somewhere deeper in the house, something settled or shifted. The sound echoed like footsteps in another room. 5 minutes, Marcus said, his jaw tight. We stay 5 minutes, and then we go. Nobody can say we chickened out. Fine, Claire folded her arms, but we're not standing in the hall like cowards. Let's look around. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but Claire had already stepped deeper into the parlor. Tom, pale and hesitant, followed, unwilling to be left alone. The parlor smelled faintly of beeswax, the kind used for polishing wood. The chair's cushions were firm beneath their tentative touch, the fabric free of wear. A painting hung above the mantel, a dark forest path winding into shadows. The longer they stared at it, the less certain they were of where the path ended. Claire tilted her head. It almost looks like it's moving. Tom's voice was small. Maybe it is. Before Marcus could scoff, the floorboard above them creaked again. Slower this time, closer to the stairs. Claire's eyes flicked toward the ceiling. I thought you said it was just the house settling. Marcus swallowed, his throat tight. Yeah, that's what I said. But his eyes never left the staircase, and for the first time that evening, the smirk slipped from his face entirely. The house was no longer just watching. It was listening. Chapter 4. A guest that stayed too long. The sound from upstairs faded into silence, but the three teenagers remained rooted to the parlor floor, ears straining for the next creak. When none came, the quiet seemed even heavier. The tick of the clock beat like a pulse, impossibly steady, impossibly loud. Claire broke the silence first. Someone's here. Tom's eyes widened. Don't say that. I mean it. Someone's upstairs. That door was unlocked, the air's warm, everything's clean. Somebody lives here. Then where are they? Marcus shot back, though his voice cracked just slightly at the end. And why would they be hiding? As if in answer, a faint vibration rippled through the floorboards beneath their feet. Not a step, not quite. More like the slow exhale of something buried deep below. Tom clutched his arms tight to his chest. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. Claire's gaze slid back to the mantel. The painting above the fireplace seemed different somehow. She blinked hard, leaning closer. The path was darker now, the shadows deeper. She could have sworn the crooked tree at the edge of the path hadn't been there before. Marcus noticed her stare. What? The painting, Claire said, her voice distant. It's changing. Marcus forced the laugh, though sweat beaded at his temple. Old paint cracks, that's all. But even as he said it, his eyes flicked back uneasily. From the hall, the clock chimed. One sharp note, then silence. Marcus frowned. That's not the hour. No, it's not. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unfinished. Tom's eyes wandered to the bookshelves tucked against the far wall. At first, he thought the spines were blank, but as he leaned closer, faint lettering emerged embossed in flaking gold. Titles in no language he recognized, curving symbols that shifted when he tried to follow them. He stepped back quickly, his skin crawling. Maybe we should leave, he said, louder now, his fear pressing against the edges of panic. Marcus turned toward the front door, eager to agree, when he froze. The door was gone. In its place stretched another hallway, narrow and dim, lined with doors on either side. The wallpaper was the same as before, ivy curling upward, its leaves pale and curling, but the hall had not been there when they entered. Tom's throat closed. Where's the door? Claire's voice was almost calm, though her face had drained of color. It moved. Marcus shook his head hard, backing away from the hall. No, that's impossible. Doors don't just... But before he could finish, a low, dragging sound echoed from somewhere deep within the house. A sound like fabric sliding across wood, slow, patient, nearer with every heartbeat. Tom clamped his hands over his ears. It wants us here. That's why the door's gone. It's not going to let us leave. Claire's gaze flicked between her friends. Her jaw tightened. Then we don't wait for it to come to us. We go upstairs, we see what's there, maybe there's another way out. Neither boy wanted to agree, but the steady scrape from the unseen depths left no choice. Together, with breaths held and nerves stretched thin, they turned toward the staircase. The air seemed warmer there, each step cloaked in a strange hum that trembled faintly against their bones. And as they began to climb, unseen eyes followed, watching, remembering. For the house knew this path well. Others had walked it before, and not all had returned.
Chapter 5. The Upstairs Halls. The staircase groaned beneath their weight, but not in protest. The sound was too measured, too deliberate, each step sighing like a drawn-out breath. The banister felt warm under their palms, as though touched by hands only moments before. Claire went first, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. Behind her, Marcus kept glancing over his shoulder, as though expecting the vanished front door to reappear. Tom lingered last, clutching the rail with white knuckles, his every breath shallow. The upstairs landing stretched wider than it had any right to. From below, the house looked narrow, compressed between its leaning trees. But here, the hallway unfurled in both directions, lined with closed doors that hadn't been visible from outside. The wallpaper was the same pale green, the ivy curling up toward the ceiling. Only now, in the dim light, the leaves looked sharper, their edges almost thorn-like. Claire whispered, "There shouldn't be this many rooms." Marcus tried to keep his tone steady. "It's just an old house. Walls don't match up sometimes, that's all." But even he couldn't ignore the way the hallway seemed to lean slightly, as though it curved toward some invisible center. They approached the nearest door. Claire's hand hesitated at the knob before she pushed it open. The room beyond was a bedroom. Simple. Too simple. The bed was neatly made with white sheets, so crisp they might never have been slept in. A chair waited by the window, angled just enough to suggest someone had been sitting there, watching the street below. The curtains swayed faintly, though the window was shut tight. Tom stepped closer. On the bedside table rested a small object, a hairbrush, its bristles bent with use. Blonde strands clung to it, glinting in the dim light. "There was someone here," he whispered. Claire touched the chair's armrest. It was still warm. Marcus's jaw tightened. "They left, that's all. They left." But the words fell flat. No one moved to sit on the bed, though it looked inviting in its perfection. The air felt wrong, too still, too staged, like a photograph of a room rather than a room itself. They backed out and shut the door. The next door opened to a study. A desk stood in the center, covered with yellowed papers and open books. The ink was fresh, though the handwriting twisted in sharp angles none of them could decipher. On the floor sat a half-burned candle, the wax hardened into a pool around its base. The smell of smoke clung faintly to the air. Claire reached for one of the papers. The letters shifted under her eyes, rearranging themselves as though they knew she was looking at them. She dropped it quickly, her pulse hammering. "I don't like this," Tom said again, his voice breaking. Neither of the others argued. They shut the study and turned to the hall again. At the far end, a single door stood half open. Unlike the others, no light slipped through the crack. Darkness pooled there, heavy and unmoving. Claire swallowed hard. Maybe that's the way out? Marcus shook his head. No, no way. But even as he said it, the clock downstairs chimed again. One sharp note, just as before, echoing up through the boards. The sound seemed to push them forward, nudging them toward the waiting door. None of them wanted to lead, but the silence behind them was worse than the dark ahead. Together, step by slow step, they moved toward the open door. And as they neared, the shadows inside seemed to lean forward, eager, as though the room itself had been holding its breath.
Chapter 6. The Door That Waited. The open door yawned like a wound at the end of the hall. No light spilled from it, no reflection glimmered in its depths. It was a blackness thicker than night, a shadow with weight. Claire was the first to step forward. Her jaw was set, though the tremor in her hand betrayed her. Marcus followed reluctantly, every muscle in his shoulders tight. Tom lagged behind, dragging his feet as if slowing himself might delay the inevitable. When Claire pushed the door wider, the hinges gave a long, shuddering groan, as though reluctant to move. The sound echoed through the hall, reverberating in their bones. The room beyond was empty, or at least it appeared to be at first. 4 walls, a wooden floor, no windows. But the air was dense, pressing against their skin, thick with the scent of earth and old iron. Marcus squinted. There's nothing here. Then why is it so dark? Tom's voice was barely a whisper. They stepped inside. The floor felt solid beneath their feet, but every sound they made seemed swallowed up before it reached the walls. The door creaked behind them, shifting ever so slightly closer to shut. "Don't let it close," Claire said sharply, spinning toward Marcus. "I'm not—" But he froze. On the far wall, faint markings glimmered in the dark. At first, they looked like scratches, long gouges carved into the plaster. But as their eyes adjusted, the scratches resolved into words, dozens of them. Names. Claire leaned closer, her stomach twisting. Some were carved deep, letters jagged and frantic. Others were faint, as though traced by trembling hands. She read the nearest aloud, her voice cracking. Daniel, Sarah, Judith. Tom staggered backward, nearly tripping. Those are people, real people. They're— "Don't," Claire cut in, though she couldn't tear her eyes away from the wall. Marcus's gaze fell lower, to the floorboards beneath the names. There were darker stains there, faint but unmistakable, sunk deep into the wood. His mouth went dry. This isn't just a room." As if in answer, the door slammed shut behind them. The sound was deafening, a gunshot of wood on wood. Tom cried out, lunging for the handle. He twisted, pulled, shoved. Nothing. The knob didn't budge. Claire's chest heaved. The air felt thicker now, cloying. She stumbled back, her hand brushing against fresh gouges on the wall, scratches that hadn't been there moments before. Marcus swore under his breath, pounding on the door. "Open, damn it, open!" The walls seemed to pulse faintly, like the rhythm of a hidden heartbeat. From somewhere beneath the floor, a low hum began to rise. It vibrated through the boards, up into their shoes, into their bones. Claire pressed himself into the corner, his eyes wide and unblinking. "It doesn't want us to leave. It never wanted us to leave." Claire grabbed his arm, trying to steady him, though her own knees trembled. Don't say that." But deep down, she knew he was right. And then, as suddenly as it had slammed, the door creaked open again. It swung inward slowly, almost politely, revealing the hallway beyond. Marcus froze, his fists still raised to pound.
What the hell? Claire stared, her pulse thundering. It let us out. Tom shook his head violently. No, it didn't. It showed us. That's different. For a long, awful moment, none of them moved. The hall beyond lay empty, silent, waiting. Finally, Claire took a shaky breath. We keep moving. We don't stay in one place. Not again. And without waiting for agreement, she stepped back into the hall. The others followed, though every instinct screamed against it. The house had tested them. It had shown them a glimpse of its history, of its appetite. And it had opened the door not out of mercy, but because it wasn't finished with them yet.
Chapter 7. The Watcher in the Window. From her bedroom window across the street, Mrs. Whitcomb watched the house with the same patience she had kept for nearly 60 years. Her rocking chair creaked softly as she leaned forward, the candlelight behind her flickering against lace curtains. She had seen the three children earlier, Marcus strutting, Claire sharp-eyed, Tom trailing nervously. She knew the look of a dare when she saw it. Youth carried the same arrogance from one generation to the next. None of them ever believed the stories until it was far too late. Her husband, God rest him, had once gone into that house himself, years before they were wed. He never spoke of what he saw, not in all the decades they shared, but she remembered how his hands shook when he came out, how his hair had turned gray at the temples within a month. She never pressed him. Some truths were poison when spoken aloud. Tonight, the house seemed restless, its silhouette pressed darker against the sky, its windows glimmering faintly like eyes catching a distant flame. She thought she saw a shift in the upstairs curtains, just a twitch, a flutter too deliberate for wind. Her cat, a soot-colored thing with torn ears, paced along the windowsill, tail lashing. It hissed once at the house before leaping down and disappearing beneath the bed. Mrs. Whitcomb sighed. "You're wiser than they are," she muttered. The clock on her wall ticked softly. She glanced at it. 8 minutes since the children entered. 8 minutes too long. Her memory wandered back. How many times had she seen it? A traveling salesman with a suitcase? A runaway girl clutching a doll? 2 drunk men laughing too loudly as they staggered up the porch. They never came out. Not in daylight, not at all. And yet, the house never bulged with the weight of them. It absorbed, it softened, it swallowed. She had reported it once, when she was younger, full of fire and certainty. The constable laughed, patted her hand, and said the missing were just that, missing. People ran, people strayed. The world was wide. Why look to a single house for blame? But she knew better. She knew the hum that carried across the street at night, that low vibration that rattled her teacups and set her dreams on edge. She knew the way the windows sometimes reflected not the street, but the faces pressed against them from inside, faces she had never seen alive. And now she saw movement again, a flicker of shadow across the upstairs landing, too tall to be Claire, too broad to be Marcus, too still to be Tom. Her hand tightened on the curtain's edge. "Not again," she whispered. "Not again." But the house had no mercy for her wishes. It never had. Across the street, the upstairs window flared briefly with light. Just a spark, like a candle catching wick. In its glow, she saw the outlines of 4 figures, not 3.
Chapter 8. The Secrets of the Past. Mrs. Whitcomb settled back into her rocking chair, though her hands still clutched the window frame. The candle behind her flickered, casting shadows across the walls like reaching fingers. She closed her eyes briefly and remembered him, her husband, Edward. He had been a curious man, stubborn and clever, with a smile that rarely faltered. But he had walked up that porch one afternoon, long before they married,
intrigued by the same stories that teased every child and stranger who came near Wexler Street. She remembered the way he had laughed as he pushed open the front door, the familiar creak of the hinges greeting him. He had called her later that evening from a neighbor's phone, voice trembling in ways she had never heard. "It's alive, Marion," he had whispered. "Not like we know life. Something inside watches, remembers, waits." Then came the letters. For weeks she received cryptic notes from him, written in the tiny, careful script she recognized, but filled with words that seemed to shift when she tried to read them. He had spoken of rooms that moved, walls that breathed, and the faint hum that pressed at his chest. And then one morning, he did not return. The neighbors said he had left town, taken a sudden job elsewhere, but she knew better. She had visited the house herself later, once, braving the gate and the porch. The interior was immaculate, as if no one had ever set foot there. Yet she felt it, the presence, the hum, the house's awareness. And she had fled, pale, trembling, because she had glimpsed the truth. The house does not forget. Decades later, she still watched. Every night, the window across the street became her eyes into that other world. The house remained the same, waiting, learning, collecting. And tonight, she saw the children. 3 intruders, 3 new presences in a house that had long ago grown too full. Her gaze tightened. She knew she could do nothing but watch, warn, and pray that their curiosity did not become their doom. The hum began again, faint at first, vibrating across the street, into her bones. She shivered. Somewhere deep in the house, the walls pulsed with memory, faces pressed against windows, names carved into plaster, whispers lost in waiting. The candle flickered once more, and she saw it. A shadow at the upstairs window, taller than any of the 3 children, watching, waiting. And Mrs. Whitcomb, her lips barely moved as she whispered, "Not again." But the house does not listen. It does not care. It simply waits. Chapter 9. The Library of Forgotten Tongues. The hallway stretched and curved as they walked, each step heavier than the last, until a door appeared at the end that none of them remembered seeing. It was tall, carved from dark wood, with symbols etched along its frame that seemed to writhe when glanced at from the corner of the eye. Claire's hand hovered over the knob, trembling. "This wasn't here before," she whispered. Marcus, jaw tight, nodded. "Nothing about this place makes sense anymore. Just, let's see." Tom, pale and shaking, muttered, "I think it wants us to see it." The door swung open with a creak that echoed down the hall. Inside, a vast library awaited them. Ceiling lost in shadow, walls lined with shelves that reached impossibly high, books stacked in uneven towers on the floor. The scent of aged paper and something faintly metallic filled the air. Every book's spine shimmered with letters that twisted and writhed, languages that shouldn't exist, words that shifted if you stared too long. Claire ran a trembling hand along a row, and the letters moved beneath her fingers, curling into forms that seemed to whisper. Tom gasped. They're talking. I can hear them." Marcus swallowed hard. "Stop it. Stop imagining things." But the whispers didn't stop. They rose in volume, layered, unintelligible but insistent, threading through the air like fine threads brushing against their ears. Each whisper seemed to tug at a memory, a secret, a fear buried deep inside. Claire stepped deeper into the room. A spiral staircase of black iron twisted upward into the darkness, lined with bookshelves that disappeared into the shadows above. Each step groaned as she ascended, the whispering growing louder, almost urgent. Tom grabbed her arm. "We shouldn't. I have to see," she said, her eyes wide. "We have to know what this is." Marcus hesitated, glancing at the stacked towers of books. One of the spines had his name written across it in curling gold letters. He blinked. The letters disappeared. He swallowed, trying to ignore the tremor in his hands. The whispers coalesced into a faint, almost musical cadence. A single phrase seemed to repeat, though they could not comprehend it. "Come. Learn. Stay." Claire reached for a tome on the topmost shelf. The book slid effortlessly into her hands, despite its height. Its cover was cool to the touch, adorned with symbols that pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of the house. She opened it, and letters rearranged themselves on the pages, forming words she could understand despite never having seen the language before. This isn't just a library. It's alive. It's remembering everything. Tom swallowed audibly. And it remembers us, too. From somewhere deep beneath the floor, a low hum rose, vibrating through the boards. It grew steadily, pulsing like the heartbeat of the house itself. Books rattled on the shelves, pages fluttered, and shadows danced along the walls. Marcus whispered, voice tight, "We need to get out of here." But the staircase ahead shifted as if it had a mind of its own. Steps appeared, disappeared, spiraling higher into darkness, beckoning them upward. The library had opened for them, and it was waiting. The library sets the stage for the next rooms, the nursery, the impossible time distortions, and the house's ultimate tests. Chapter 10. The Nursery. The hallway leading from the library twisted impossibly, as if the house itself had grown limbs overnight. The air became warmer, heavier, tinged with the faintest scent of powder and wax. Claire led the way, Marcus close behind, Tom dragging his feet with every step. At the end of the hall, a door loomed slightly ajar, its frame carved with tiny shapes, infants frozen in mid-gesture, eyes hollow and wide. A faint, rocking creak floated out from the room, rhythmic and steady, like a lullaby caught between sleep and nightmare. Claire swallowed hard. I think it's a nursery." Marcus's jaw tightened. "It's not a nursery. It's a trap." Tom shivered. "Why does it feel like it knows us?" Pushing the door open, they stepped inside. The room was immaculate. A small cradle sat in the center, polished wood gleaming as though freshly carved. The mobile above it spun slowly, silver moons and stars twirling without any visible motion. A faint lullaby hummed from nowhere and everywhere at once, soft but insistent, winding around their ears and tugging at their hearts. Claire moved closer to the cradle. Nothing was inside, yet she felt eyes watching her, pressing insistently from the shadows. The walls were lined with shelves of toys, all pristine, all lifelike. Dolls with wide, glassy eyes stared at them, some sitting upright, others propped in impossible poses, their heads tilting to follow the trio as they moved. Tom pointed toward the window. It's too still out there." Marcus's hands clenched. "It doesn't want us to leave. It wants us here, all of us. It doesn't care if we notice it yet. It's patient." A sudden chill ran down Claire's spine. She glanced at the rocking cradle, expecting motion, but it rocked gently, almost of its own accord. Then the hum of the lullaby deepened. The doll's eyes glimmered with a faint, unnatural light. One of them, nearest the window, tilted its head forward, as if listening. Tom gasped, stumbling backward. I don't like it. I can't." A low vibration pulsed through the floor, stronger than before, as if the house itself were breathing. The cradle's soft rocking accelerated subtly. The lullaby wound tighter, threading through the room like a net. The walls seemed to lean in, pressing closer,
listening, remembering. Claire's eyes were drawn to a small mirror on the far wall. At first she saw only themselves, three pale, frightened faces. Then the reflection twisted. Behind them, shadowed figures pressed close, taller than any child, leaning just beyond the light. The mirror's surface rippled faintly, and when she blinked, they were gone. But the sense of being observed remained. Marcus pulled at Claire's arm. "We move, now. Don't stop looking at anything else." Tom followed, voice quivering. "The house remembers us. It knows who we are." And somewhere deep beneath the floors, the pulse of the house quickened, its hum threading around them like invisible fingers. The nursery was a test, a warning, and a trap. And the house was patient.
Chapter 11. Lost Time. The corridor beyond the nursery seemed endless. Every step echoed unnaturally, though no one else appeared to be there. The air had grown heavier, thick with the faint scent of wax, paper, and something darker. Iron, old and bitter. Claire led the way, her hand brushing against the wall. Each touch left a faint warmth, as though the house remembered her, marking her presence. Behind her, Marcus's eyes darted nervously, catching shadows that moved against logic. Tom stumbled, nearly tripping over a seam in the floor that had not been there moments ago. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus muttered. "We should be back at the stairs by now. We can't have walked this far." Claire frowned, studying the hall. The walls stretched slightly with each step, corridors lengthening impossibly. Doorways appeared and vanished, leaving them to navigate a maze that seemed to know every thought. "I don't like it," Tom whispered, his voice trembling. "It's—" The words caught in his throat. Something shifted behind them, a soft creak, a step that didn't belong to anyone in the house. He turned, but the hall was empty, yet the sound persisted, growing closer. Claire shook her head. "It's trying to confuse us, make us lose track of time." They tried to mark their path. Marcus touched the walls with chalk from a loose pencil he found in his pocket, marking X's and arrows, but each time they turned a corner, the marks seemed to fade, or appear somewhere else entirely. Hours, or was it minutes, slipped by unnoticed. They found rooms repeating themselves. The parlor, the study, even the nursery appeared again, slightly altered as though the house were replaying moments for them to witness. I think we've been walking for hours, or maybe days. I don't know. I don't know anymore." Claire's jaw tightened. "We have to keep moving. We can't stop." The house seemed to respond to their fear. Doors opened more readily, revealing impossible rooms. A hallway that stretched into darkness while the ceiling climbed higher than the eye could see. A mirrored room where their reflections stared at them with expressions not their own. Marcus stumbled into a small alcove and froze. On the wall, names were carved, people who had entered the house long ago. Some were recent, others decades old. And at the bottom, a space with fresh scratches. The letters not fully formed. They recognized their own handwriting. Claire gasped. It's already started to remember us." From somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, a low hum began again, pulsing in a rhythm too steady to be natural. The walls seemed to lean inward, narrowing the corridor. Shadows pressed closer, and the faintest whispers wound through the air, teasing memories, fears, and secrets they had never told anyone. Time had no meaning here. The house was patient. It could wait. It could stretch, fold, and distort reality until its guests forgot what was real. And Marcus, Claire, and Tom, despite every instinct screaming to run, pressed onward, drawn deeper into the labyrinth that had already begun to own them. The house had begun its long game, and they had no idea how to stop it.
Chapter 12. The Door That Won't Stay Closed. The corridor narrowed, curving in ways that made their heads spin. Marcus's hands were pressed to the walls, trying to feel for a familiar seam, a landmark, but each surface was smooth, unyielding, as though it had never been touched. Ahead, a door appeared, simple, wooden, slightly warped. Claire reached for the knob, but it shifted in her grip, as if alive. The door swung open with a groan that vibrated through their bones, revealing another hallway beyond. Marcus exhaled, relief fleeting. Finally, maybe this leads out. But when he turned to glance back, the door had vanished. Where it had stood, only smooth wall remained. Tom's voice quivered. It keeps moving. Every time we try to leave, it... A low, dragging sound slid through the floorboards beneath them. Something deep and deliberate, like fabric scraping across wood. The hum of the house deepened, pulsing against their chests. Claire swallowed hard. We can't stop. If we do, it'll... Before she could finish, the door ahead slammed shut violently. Marcus lunged, hands gripping the frame, but it refused to budge. From the other side came a faint scratching, like nails raking against wood. "I told you, it doesn't want us to leave!" Tom screamed. The walls seemed to lean closer, narrowing the corridor. Shadows pooled unnaturally at the edges of their vision, creeping along the floor, climbing the walls. The house wasn't just guiding them, it was herding them, testing them. Claire's gaze flicked to the next door, slightly ajar, but different from the others. Its surface pulsed faintly, like it had a heartbeat. She knew instinctively this door was the only way forward, yet the only one that could trap them entirely. Marcus shook his head. "I'm not doing it, not this time." But before he could resist, the door swung wider, beckoning. A faint glow slipped through the crack, illuminating shapes in the darkness. Shapes they could not identify, but that seemed to watch. Tom's voice was a trembling whisper. It's waiting for us to choose, and if we don't..." The walls creaked, flexed, and seemed to pulse with impatience. The house was alive in ways they had barely begun to understand. Every hallway, every door, every shadow was part of its will. Claire stepped forward, heart pounding. Marcus hesitated, but the pressure of the narrowing corridor left no choice. Tom followed, shivering, muttering under his breath. "It's learning. It knows who we are." The door closed behind them with a finality that made them all jump. And somewhere deep within the house, the hum shifted, a slow, deliberate vibration that spoke of memory, patience, and appetite. The house was waiting, but this time it was ready to act.
Chapter 13. The library's secrets deepen. The door led them back into a room that resembled the library, yet it was different, older, darker, and alive in a way that made the air vibrate faintly against their skin. Shelves twisted impossibly upward, vanishing into shadows that seemed denser than night. Books lay stacked in chaotic towers on the floor, yet each stack was perfect, deliberate, waiting. Claire stepped forward, her fingers brushing a spine. The letters shimmered, twisting into shapes she almost recognized. Names, dates, fragments of events that had never been told aloud. A chill ran through her. It knows people, all of them. Marcus's gaze swept the room. No, it knows us too. Every time we touch a book, every move we make, it's watching. Tom shivered. And it remembers us from the moment we walked in. The library seemed to respond to their fear. Shadows lengthened along the shelves, converging, pulsing like liquid. A low hum filled the room, building into a resonance that made the floor vibrate under their feet. Claire found a table at the center, a thick tome open and waiting. Its pages were blank, yet when she leaned close, letters appeared, curling into words that described her, her friends,
their voices, their thoughts, events from minutes ago, written in ink that seemed alive. "This is impossible," she whispered. "It knows people. All of them." Marcus's gaze swept the room. "No, no, it knows us too. Every time we touch a book, every move we make, it's watching." Tom shivered. "And it remembers us from the moment we walked in." The library seemed to respond to their fear. Shadows lengthened along the shelves, converging, pulsing like liquid. A low hum filled the room, building into a resonance that made the floor vibrate under their feet. Claire found a table at the center, a thick tome open and waiting. Its pages were blank, yet when she leaned close, letters appeared, curling into words that described her, her friends, their voices, their thoughts, events from minutes ago, written in ink that seemed alive. "This is impossible," she whispered. "It knows what we think." Marcus swallowed hard. "And it's using that against us. Every move we make, every fear, it's feeding on it." From somewhere high above, the spiral staircase groaned. Books shifted slightly, as though a breeze moved through the dark void. But there was no wind. Tom's eyes widened. I think it wants us to climb." Claire shook her head, though her hands had already found the railing. "We have no choice. It's guiding us, showing us." As they ascended, the walls seemed to lean closer. The air thickened. Shadows of figures they had never seen before flickered across the shelves. Some pressed faces to the books. Others stared silently from the corners, observing them with lifeless eyes. Marcus followed reluctantly, voice tight. "Every story, every name in this place, it's all people who came before us, and none of them left." Claire glanced back at Tom. "Then we have to be careful. Every step, every choice matters." The spiral staircase curved higher into darkness, bookshelves stretching impossibly above, whispering their own secrets. The hum became a voice, a soft melodic cadence repeating a phrase they couldn't fully comprehend, yet understood instinctively. "Learn, remember, stay." Tom swallowed, shaking. "It doesn't want us to leave. It never wants anyone to leave." And above them, somewhere in the shadowed heights of the library, the house pulsed with memory, patience, and intent. It had waited long for guests like them, and now it was fully aware.
Chapter 14. The Nursery's Secrets. When they descended from the spiral staircase, the corridor before them had shifted once more. The nursery's door, previously left behind, now loomed larger than it should have, its frame warped as though stretching upward. The soft lullaby that had once been distant now pulsed through the air, insistent and melodic, threading around their ears like invisible fingers. Claire stepped forward cautiously, feeling the floorboards vibrate faintly beneath her feet. Marcus followed, tense, every muscle coiled. Tom lagged behind, eyes wide, hands shaking, whispering, it remembers everything." Inside, the nursery had changed. The cradle rocked slowly, though no breeze stirred the air. Dolls lined the shelves, each positioned differently than before, heads tilted, eyes glinting in faint, unnatural light. Claire noticed that the eyes seemed to follow them, tracking their every movement, and for a moment she swore one had blinked. Tom pointed toward a small mirror on the far wall. It's showing things," he murmured. Claire approached, looking closely. Their reflections stared back, but subtly wrong. Their expressions twisted, faces paler, eyes darker, fear exaggerated beyond reality. And behind them, faint figures shimmered, shapes pressed close to the glass, invisible to direct sight, but undeniable in the reflection. Marcus swallowed hard. It's making us see what it wants us to see, changing reality."
The lullaby rose, weaving through the room in waves. It carried whispers, fragments of names, hints of past guests. Claire caught one clearly: Judith, Daniel, Sarah. Names she had never known, yet their syllables pressed against her memory as if familiar. The cradle tilted gently, rocking faster, and a chill wind, cold and sharp, swept across the floor. The dolls shifted in their positions, heads turning in unison toward the children. A soft scraping sound echoed from beneath the floorboards, like nails dragging slowly across wood. Tom stumbled back, whispering, It wants us to stay forever." Claire's hands trembled as she reached for the door at the far end. It pulsed faintly, throbbing in rhythm with the hum that resonated through the house itself. We keep moving," she said, voice quivering. "We have no choice." Marcus nodded, swallowing his fear. "Every step it guides us. Every room it shows us. It's a test." The nursery seemed to breathe around them. Shadows stretched and recoiled, whispering, twisting. The lullaby pulsed in perfect synchrony with the house's heartbeat. The doll's eyes glimmered as if alive, and somewhere deep below, the house remembered all who had walked these floors before, and the knowledge fed its patience, its hunger, its design. With a collective shudder, they stepped forward into the pulsing doorway, leaving the nursery behind, but carrying its weight with them. The house was patient. It waited, and it was learning.
Chapter 15. The Clock of Endless Hours. The hallway they now walked through felt impossibly long. Every step reverberated unnaturally, the air heavy with the hum of the house. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly, guiding them forward. At the end of the corridor, a grand clock stood alone. Its face was black, hands frozen, but the pendulum swung with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The low hum of the house synchronized with it, pulsing in their chests like a heartbeat. Claire approached first, compelled, though every instinct screamed to stop. It controls time," she whispered. "Every room, every step, every moment, it stretches, bends, traps us." Marcus stepped closer, eyes wide. "That's why we couldn't track how long we'd been here. Days? Hours? It doesn't care. It shapes time itself." Tom trembled, backing up. It wants us to be part of it, to stay forever." The pendulum swung faster. Shadows twisted along the walls, shapes that resembled past visitors pressed into the edges of perception. The library, the nursery, the corridors, they all bled together, layering moments into one impossible, looping reality. Claire reached for the clock. The hands turned smoothly at her touch, but each tick echoed backward and forward at once. The room seemed to tilt, rotate, stretch. She stumbled, and for an instant she saw herself, older, gaunt, eyes hollow, standing inside the clock's face, trapped in time. Marcus grabbed her arm. "We leave. We run. Now." Tom followed, voice breaking. We can't fight it. We can't escape it. It remembers us. It always does." They sprinted down the hall, the walls bending, the rooms changing, but somehow the exit, the first door they had entered through, appeared before them. The outside night sky shone faintly beyond it, familiar and yet distorted, like a dream they could almost recall. With a collective effort, they pushed through the door. The front porch creaked beneath their feet. The air smelled of asphalt, weeds, and rain. They didn't look back, not until they reached the street. Marcus gasped. We made it." Claire's chest heaved. We survived, somehow." Tom stared at the house. Its shadow stretched unnaturally long in the streetlight. The windows were dark,
yet they seemed to glimmer faintly, reflecting not the street, but the echo of the rooms inside. Mrs. Whitcomb watched from her window across the street, eyes narrowed. She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply waited, as she always had. The house settled, patient, hungry, eternal. And somewhere deep within, the clock ticked on. Time was meaningless here, but the house had remembered the trespassers. It would wait. Always. Always. The three of them didn't speak as they walked down Wexler Street. Every instinct told them the house was still watching, waiting, learning, and they knew deep in their bones that it would never forget them. The house had survived another night, and in the quiet darkness, it waited for the next ones foolish enough to enter.
Did you enjoy that short story? I hope you found it spooky. Now, time for another tale.
The House That Watches. Chapter 1. The House That Watches. The house did not greet you when you moved in. It did not groan in welcome or rattle the windows in protest. It simply sat, a tall, narrow silhouette at the end of a lane that no one walked after dark. The neighbors hadn't said much when you arrived. A glance from behind curtains, a nod that died before it reached a smile. You told yourself people in small towns kept to themselves. Still, you noticed how their eyes lingered on the house, not on you. By day, the place seemed almost ordinary. Dust layered every surface, cobwebs laced the corners, but sunlight softened its edges. The wood smelled old but warm, like a library left untouched. You could almost believe the house was just a house. Almost. It began the first night. You lay in your bed, an iron frame left behind by some previous tenant, and listened to the silence. But the silence was never still. The rafters clicked like knuckles flexing. The stairs groaned as though a foot had pressed it down. A door swayed somewhere far away, although you had locked them all. You told yourself it was nothing. Old houses shifted. Wood remembered every step it had ever carried. Still, unease coiled in your stomach as the sounds seemed to answer one another, call and reply, as though the house were speaking in a language made of creaks and sighs. At first, you tried to laugh it off. You even spoke aloud, your voice trembling but light. "Good night, house. Settle down now." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Nights stretched into weeks. The oddities settled into patterns. When you stepped down the hallway, there was always another step, just behind yours, slightly delayed. When you shut your bedroom door, you heard another close, faint and muffled, elsewhere in the dark. One night, you whispered good night again, half mocking, half afraid. To your shock, the silence broke, not with a groan of wood, but with something softer, a sound like breath. It was faint, shallow, close. You held your own breath
and listened. The sound did not stop. Your pulse quickened. You told yourself it was the wind slipping through the window frame, a trick of your tired mind. But when you let your breath out, you heard another breath follow, half a second late, as though someone lay beside you, invisible, copying the rise and fall of your chest. You pulled the blanket higher, childish but desperate. You shut your eyes, pressed your hands together beneath your cheek, and tried to sleep. The false breathing behind yours matched every inhale, every exhale. And then, closer than your own thoughts, came a whisper. Dry, threadbare, but unmistakably human. Don't turn around. Your body froze. You felt the words graze your ear like a fingertip. You didn't turn. You didn't breathe. You didn't dare. You stayed still until sleep, or something like it, dragged you under. When you woke, the blanket had been pulled down to your waist.
Chapter 2. Settling Dust. Morning softened the fear. Sunlight pooled against the warped wooden floors, and the quiet seemed harmless again. You almost laughed at yourself while making coffee in the chipped enamel pot left behind in the kitchen. The house looked different in daylight. Its wallpaper faded but not menacing, its crooked beams more quaint than cruel. You opened a window to let in air, and dust swirled like pale insects in the light. The breeze carried the sound of birds, distant but alive. For a moment, you felt almost embarrassed. Have you really believed a whisper crawled into your ear last night? Sleep deprivation could explain it. You hadn't been resting well since the move. New place, new bed, strange hours. The mind makes tricks of exhaustion. Still, when you stepped into the hallway, your foot landed, and you swore you heard another step echo a heartbeat later. A soft pat, not wood, but flesh. You froze, staring down the dim hall, but nothing moved. Only the wallpaper peeling in tired curls, only the dust drifting where sunlight could not reach. You exhaled, laughed shakily, and forced yourself forward. Houses had sounds, that was all. The rest of the day passed in quiet routines, unpacking boxes, folding clothes, trying to make rooms less empty. By evening, you almost convinced yourself you would imagine the whole thing. Almost. As twilight seeped in, shadows drew long across the floorboards. You made yourself dinner, and as the pan hissed on the stove, you spoke aloud, just to hear a human voice in the silence. See, nothing strange. Just me, some eggs, and this creaky old house. The house replied. Not in words, not quite, but with a muffled thud above your head, as though something heavy shifted across the attic floor. You froze, spatula in hand. The sound came again, slower, dragging. You swallowed, forced a weak laugh. Probably a squirrel, you muttered, though you had never heard a squirrel move like something dragging its weight. Dinner turned to ash in your mouth after that. Every bite was chewed with ears straining, waiting for another sound. None came. Night drew in reluctantly. You considered sleeping on the couch, but the living room window looked out on the overgrown yard, and the shapes of the trees pressed too close. So you went upstairs, one hesitant step after another. The stair groaned, long and low, as if it remembered your weight. When you reached your room, the air was cooler than the rest of the house. A smell lingered,
Dust and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. You set your lamp by the bed, climbed under the covers, and whispered to no one, "Good night." The house answered. A creak from the hallway, then another. Steps, slow, deliberate, approaching your door. You gripped the blanket, knuckles white, your breath shallowed. For a moment you thought you would see the handle turn, but it didn't. The footsteps stopped just outside. Minutes passed, or hours, you could not tell. Then it began again. That second breath, faint and delayed, slipping into rhythm with yours. You pressed your lips shut, held the air in your chest. A pause. The false breath waited, and then it exhaled, without you. That was worse. You trembled, every muscle burning. The whisper came again, rasping through the dark. "Don't turn around." You nearly cried, but you didn't move, didn't dare. Eventually, exhaustion smothered terror, and you fell into a fitful, shallow sleep. When morning came, dust lay thick across the floorboards, but it was disturbed. 2 sets of footprints tracked across the room. Only one was yours.
Chapter 3. The Voice Beneath the Breath. You did not want to look at the footprints. Morning light only made them clearer, pale depressions in the dust, side by side with your own. They trailed from the door to the edge of the bed, then vanished, as if the second set had simply stopped existing. You crouched low, touched one with your fingertip. The shape was wrong, not a shoe print, not bare skin either. The edges were blurred, uneven, as though the floor itself had sagged under something that wasn't quite solid. A shudder ran through you, and you stood so quickly your head swam. The rest of the day blurred. You tried to busy yourself, laundry, sweeping, rearranging furniture, but the house seemed determined to remind you that you were not alone. A door slammed upstairs while you were in the kitchen. A laugh, faint and brittle, slipped through the vents while you washed dishes. Once, when you glanced into the hallway mirror, you thought you saw a figure standing behind you, too tall, too still. But when you spun, the hallway was empty. By late afternoon, you had given up pretending it was normal. You sat in the parlor, curtains drawn, and whispered to yourself, "It's just the house. Just the house." That night, you stayed awake as long as you could, candle flickering on the bedside table. You thought if you could see the thing, catch it in the act, you might understand it, might stop fearing shadows. Hours passed. The candle burned low. Your eyelids dragged down, heavier and heavier. Sleep took you in fits, and with it came dreams. You dreamed of breathing, not your own, but hundreds layered together, whispering over each other like waves. You stood in the center of a dark, endless hall, and the breaths circled you, chasing one another, echoing your every inhale. Somewhere among them, one voice separated from the chorus, "Don't turn around." You tried to speak, but your throat felt full of dust. The voice continued, close to your ear though the hall was empty. "You mustn't turn. That's the rule." You gasped awake, candle guttering. The air was colder than it had been when you drifted off. And there it was, the second breath, steady and patient, waiting for yours. Tears stung your eyes. You whispered, voice cracking, "What do you want?" For the first time, it answered. A long pause, then in a voice like wood splintering, "To be seen." Your blood iced over. You clamped your eyes shut, refusing to turn. You remembered the rule, but the weight shifted at the edge of the bed, pressing into the mattress. The false breath leaned closer, hot and damp against your neck. "To be seen,"
It repeated. You whispered through clenched teeth, "I won't." The mattress groaned, weight sliding closer still. You braced yourself, fists tangled in the blanket. Then, silence. No breath, no whisper, only the pounding of your heart in your ears. You dared a glance toward the wall, not behind you, never behind, but in the window glass, warped by age, you thought you saw a shadow leaning over your shoulder. It smiled.
Chapter 4. The Mirror in the Hall. The next morning, you found yourself avoiding the hallway. It was impossible to forget what you had glimpsed, the warped reflection in the window glass, a grin that did not belong to you. It gnawed at the edges of your mind all through breakfast. Every corner of the house felt sharper, darker, as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for you to notice them again. By noon, you forced yourself to face the hallway. The mirror there had been with the house for decades, tall, framed in dark oak carved with twisting vines, its surface fogged by time. You had wiped it clean when you first moved in, but it always seemed to gather a film of shadow no cloth could remove. You told yourself you would look just once, reassure yourself, prove that it was nothing. Your reflection stared back, pale and exhausted. The house loomed dimly behind you, warped by the glass. You leaned closer, touched your own cheek as if to remind yourself you were solid, you were real, and then your reflection blinked. Not with you. A fraction. Too late. You stumbled back, heart hammering. The glass stayed still, reflecting your terror, your wide eyes, but you knew the timing had been wrong. You left the hallway and did not return for hours. That night, sleep felt impossible. Every creak, every sigh of the house twisted your stomach. You kept the lamp burning, afraid of the dark, but it only cast longer shadows. Around midnight, you heard it, the slow creak of the floorboards outside your door. A step, then another. You pressed yourself against the mattress, pulling the blanket to your chin. The second breath followed, always that faint echo of your own lungs, dragging a half-second behind. You whispered into the dark, desperate. Why me? Why here? The voice came low, splintering like dry wood. The house remembers who sees it. The words made no sense, and yet they lodged in your mind like barbs. You clenched your fists, whispered back, I won't turn around. A pause, then a sound. Laughter, soft and brittle, as though the walls themselves were cracking with amusement. At last, exhaustion pulled you under. You dreamed of the hallway mirror. This time, your reflection smiled before you did. It lifted its hand as though to wave, but the hand on your side remained still. The reflection tapped its fingers against the glass, impatient, eager. You woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The lamp was out. The bulb burned to nothing. Morning brought little comfort. When you passed the hallway again, you couldn't help but glance at the mirror. Your reflection followed, as it should. But just before you stepped out of sight, you swore you saw its head turn toward you, watching, even as you walked away. You didn't dare check again. That night, the mirror called to you in dreams. The reflection leaned forward, lips pressed to the glass, whispering, in a voice identical to yours. Don't turn around. Look at me instead. Chapter 5. Footsteps in Tandem. By now,
you would stop telling yourself the house was ordinary. Every creak, every sigh, every warped reflection was deliberate, too precise, too patient. But the footsteps were the worst. They had begun as faint echoes, half a beat behind your own, easy enough to dismiss in those first weeks. Now they were sharper, heavier, a rhythm trying to sync with yours. When you walked down the hall, the sound pressed at your heels, close enough to make you stumble. One evening, determined to prove you weren't losing your mind, you set a test. You walked the length of the upstairs hall, slowly at first. One step, pause. One step, pause. The echo followed, faithful, measured, matching every pause. "Hello?" you called, voice too loud in the empty house. "Who's there?" Silence. You tried again, softer this time. "What do you want?" The echo answered, but not with words. A deliberate step, loud, from directly behind you. You spun, heart in your throat. The hall was empty, dust motes drifting through a shaft of twilight. Still, the air felt occupied, thick as if with breath. That night, you lay in bed with the blanket pulled high, the lamp burning low. Hours ticked by, heavy with dread. And then, footsteps, slow, pacing the hall outside your door. Back and forth, back and forth. Your throat tightened. The sound went on so long it became maddening, as though whoever or whatever paced there had no need for rest. Finally, you whispered, trembling, "Please stop." The steps halted. Silence pressed in like weight. Then, a voice, muffled through the door, rasped, "Come walk with me." You clutched the blanket, shaking your head, though no one could see. "No!" The voice laughed, brittle as dry leaves. "Then I'll walk alone." The footsteps resumed, faster now, agitated, dragging across the boards. You pressed your palms to your ears, tears burning your eyes. The sound grew louder, closer, until it felt as though the pacing had moved into your room, though the door had never opened. And then, nothing. You dared to lower your hands, dared to breathe. The silence was almost worse, thick and waiting. A creak sounded at the edge of the bed. You whispered, "Don't turn around." The mattress sank, weight pressing beside your legs. The voice leaned close, so close you felt the cold of it brush your cheek. "Then walk in your dreams." You fell asleep without meaning to, terror blurring into unconsciousness. In the dream, you walked a hall much longer than your own. Footsteps echoed in tandem, never yours alone. When you stopped, the echo stopped. When you ran, it chased. The air was full of whispers, but one rose above the rest. "If you walk far enough, you'll find me." You awoke with your legs aching, as though you had been walking all night. When you looked down, dust clung to your feet.
Chapter 6. The Whispered Rules. You began to notice the patterns. The whispers came only after midnight. The footsteps never started until you had spoken aloud, even if it was only to yourself. The mirror in the hall grew restless if you stared too long, but ignored you if you passed in silence. Rules, unwritten, but binding.
One evening you sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, scrawling thoughts by the light of a single bulb. Your handwriting shook with exhaustion. Don't turn around when it whispers. Don't speak after midnight. Don't look too long in mirrors. Don't answer its questions. You underlined the last one twice. The memory of the rasp outside your door, "Come walk with me," still gnawed at your spine. But that night, the entity seemed determined to test you. You woke to the sound of breathing again, close, in tandem with your own. Only this time the breaths came not from behind you, but from both sides, left, right, as though something leaned close on either side of your pillow. You clenched your eyes shut, your heart raced. Then came the whisper, doubled, one in each ear. "Do you want to know the rules?" You shook your head, fists tight around the blanket. You didn't answer. The whispers pressed closer, insistent, overlapping. You already follow them. You already know. You cannot leave unless you keep them. You cannot stay unless you break them. Tears burned your eyes. You whispered, barely audible, "Why me?" The voices fell silent. Then one, softer than before, replied, "Because you listened." You wanted to scream, but fear pinned you down. Instead, you whispered, "What happens if I break them?" The weight at the edge of the bed shifted. Something leaned closer, so near you felt the absence of heat, a void colder than breath. "Then you'll see me," it rasped. Silence stretched. Then slowly the voices began reciting rules you had not written. Never cover the mirror. Never sleep with the lamp burning. Never close the attic door once it opens. Your mind reeled. You wanted to cover your ears, but your arms refused to move. Never leave food uneaten. Never answer the one who knocks. Never look at the bed while you lie in it. Your throat closed with panic. You wanted to tell yourself it was a dream, but the chill soaking into your bones was too real. Finally, the voices fell silent, and the second breath returned, steady, patient, always half a second late. At last, exhaustion won. You slept, restless and thin. When morning came, you sat again at the table with your notebook. You flipped to the page where you had listed your rules, but the words were no longer yours. The handwriting had changed, slanted, sharp, gouged deep into the paper as if carved by something that had no patience for pens. The new list was longer, and some of the rules were ones you didn't remember hearing. Chapter 7. Sleepless Hours. After the rules appeared in your notebook, sleep became a threat, not a reprieve, not rest, a trap. You decided you would not sleep, not tonight, not at all. You prepared like a soldier, brewed bitter coffee until the pot rattled, lined candles along your desk, sat upright in a chair instead of daring the bed. The house seemed to sense your defiance. It waited, quiet, as if listening. Midnight came. You sipped the last of your coffee, heart jittering, nerves raw. No whispers yet, no steps, just silence, heavy and suffocating. By 2 a.m., the silence grew louder. You hadn't thought silence could press against your skin, but it did, thick as fog, clinging, pushing. The floorboards groaned as though under invisible weight. A draft stirred, though every window was latched. The flame of your candle bent sideways, trembling. You whispered to yourself, desperate, "I won't sleep. I won't." That was the mistake. The footsteps began instantly, slow, measured, coming from the far end of the hall. You clutched the arms of the chair, knuckles pale. The steps grew closer, closer, until they stopped, just outside your door. A long pause, then 3 knocks, slow, hollow, patient. Your chest tightened. You remembered the rule, never answer the one who knocks. So you sat frozen, biting your tongue to hold back sound. The knocks came again, louder this time. Then a voice, muffled through the door. You're awake. Your stomach turned to ice. You wanted to scream back, no, but you knew better. The rule forbade it. The doorknob rattled. Metal clicked against wood. Then silence. You thought it was over until you heard it. A scrape from beneath your chair. Something moving under the floorboards. Crawling, following the rhythm of your breathing. Your heart pounded so loud you thought it would give you away. You clamped a hand over your mouth, shivering. The crawling stopped directly beneath you. Then the voice came again, not from the hall this time, but from under your feet. You can't stay awake forever. The candle guttered, smoke curling into the room. Darkness swelled. You lasted until dawn, somehow. Your body trembled with exhaustion, eyes raw and burning. The morning light crept through the curtains, pale and weak, but enough to scatter the presence pressing close all night. You staggered to the table, collapsed in the chair, and stared at your notebook. A new line had been scratched into the list of rules. Never stay awake past 3. Chapter 8. Faces in the Wood Grain. The house began speaking in new ways. It was subtle at first. A knot in the wood that looked vaguely like a twisted smile. A streak in the floorboard that might have been a shadow or a mouth. You convinced yourself it was imagination, tired eyes playing tricks. Until the night you were brushing your teeth and glanced at the bathroom doorframe. A face stared back at you. Not your own reflection, not even human. Eyes like hollow pits, crooked grins stretched across a wooden jaw. You froze, toothbrush dangling, heart slamming. When you blinked, it was gone. Only the grain of the door remained. You didn't sleep that night. You moved slowly through the house, running fingertips along the walls, tracing the grain in search of familiar patterns. But every plank had its own face, every beam its own sneer. You whispered to yourself, trying to hold on to reason. It's the house, it's the wood, it's just knots and shadows. But the house didn't listen. The second breath followed you from room to room, always just behind, always late. By midnight, you were in the parlor, hands pressed against the warped floorboards. You tried to convince yourself to sit, to rest, but the grain beneath your fingers writhed, subtly, impossibly. Faces emerged in relief, mouths opening and closing without sound, eyes narrowing, following your every movement. You flinched, recoiling. "Stop!" you shouted into the empty room. The house answered, not with wood, not with sound, but with a shift in the air. The faces moved closer, crowded along the walls, peeking from the beams overhead. You felt watched from every angle, the eyes turning toward your chest, your hands, your very thoughts. A whisper curled along the baseboards. "Look closer." You shook your head. "No, never." The whisper pressed harder. "You must see. You must learn." You turned your head slightly and glimpsed one of the faces emerging fully from the grain, lips parting as if to speak. Your stomach lurched. You fell backward, hitting the floor. The candle toppled, guttering out. Darkness swallowed the room. Then a new sound, the footsteps, not from the hall, but within the walls themselves, slow, deliberate, echoing from everywhere. A breath pressed against your neck. You stiffened, eyes shut tight. "Why do you hide?" the voice rasped. You swallowed, choking back terror. I don't want to see you." The weight shifted. brushing the small of your back, cold as marble, impossible as air. The whisper came again, patient, intimate. You will. One day you will look, and then you will belong. Morning found you collapsed on the floor with notebook in hand. The wooden faces had vanished in the sunlight, or maybe they had never been gone. You didn't care to test. But the notebook, once again, bore a new rule. Never touch the walls after midnight. You didn't sleep that day either. Chapter 9. The Visitor at Midnight. By now, the nights had become battles. Sleep was a surrender. Darkness was a trap. Every shadow, every creak, every whisper was a challenge, a test, a reminder that the house had learned your patterns, and you could not outrun it. That night, you decided to confront it, or at least prepare for its arrival. You lined the walls of your room with candles, their flames trembling like tiny sentinels. You positioned your notebook in front of you, pen ready. You spoke aloud the rules over and over, as if repetition could ward off what waited. Midnight arrived. At first, there was silence. The second breath did not come. You dared a small smile. Perhaps the house was allowing reprieve. Then, a sound unlike any other. Slow footsteps, not echoing yours this time. Heavy, measured, approaching from the hallway. Your chest tightened. The doorknob rattled. Then the faintest scratch of something against the floor, deliberate, crawling closer. You whispered, voice shaking, "I'm awake. I'm ready." A shadow detached itself from the corner. Not fully solid, not fully absent, formed from darkness and air, shifting as though trying to define itself. Two glowing points, like coals, floated where eyes might be. Limbs were suggested, not real, and yet you knew it could touch you, follow you, copy you. You're brave or foolish, time will tell, the voice whispered, rasping through the room. You swallowed. What are you? The visitor tilted its head. The glowing points blinked like hesitant stars. I am the watcher, the keeper, the one who follows when you breathe, who waits when you close your eyes. I am what the house remembers. You took a cautious step back. Your foot hit the edge of a candle, sending it clattering to the floor. Flames sputtered, smoke rose. The entity did not flinch. You can't leave, and you cannot stay unless you obey. Your hands shook. Obey what? What do you want? The form drifted closer, limbs stretching in impossible angles. Only to be seen, only to teach. The rules are mine, the house is mine, and soon you will belong here with me. You pressed yourself against the far wall. I won't belong, I won't. The second breath whispered against your ear, warm, patient, perfectly timed. You froze, understanding instantly. You already belong, it said. The visitor moved in closer, just close enough to brush your hair, a cold wind, almost solid. You could see in fragments a pale face behind the shifting darkness, features only half formed, like a mask in decay. Eyes bright, teeth glinting. It smiled. Sleep, dream, and I will visit you again. Exhaustion claimed you, and when you awoke, the visitor was gone. Only faint footprints pressed into the dust of your floor. 2 sets again, yours,
and the echoes. The notebook bore a new line. Never face the visitor completely.
Chapter 10. Don't turn around. By now, the rules had grown longer than your patience. Every night, the house pushed you closer to exhaustion. Every reflection, every floorboard, every whisper reminded you of your place. A guest, a prisoner, a witness. But tonight, you could not resist. You sat on the edge of your bed, notebook open, candles guttering low. You read the rules aloud, voice steady despite the tremor in your hands. The second breath matched you perfectly, patient, echoing, taunting. A shadow pooled at the foot of the bed, heavier than any before. The visitor had returned. Its form was more defined now, limbs hinted at muscle, hands like skeletal claws. The pale, half-formed face hovered just above your feet, eyes bright with something alive, teeth gleaming faintly. "Are you ready?" it rasped. You shook your head, but your voice trembled, betraying curiosity. I need to see." The entity laughed, a brittle, scraping sound. "Then you will." You forced yourself to rise. Candlelight trembled across the walls. Every plank, every grain, every shadow of the house seemed alive. The rules screamed in your mind. Never turn around. Never face completely. But curiosity, terrible, irresistible, tugged at your spine. You stepped backward, slow, careful, toward the hallway mirror. Your hands shook, clenching the notebook. You whispered to yourself, desperate, "I will not turn. I will not look directly." The visitor floated closer, an impossible shadow brushing the edge of your vision. The second breath pressed near your ear. The whispers multiplied, layering over one another. Turn, look, belong. You froze. 1 step, 2 steps, a heartbeat. Then a voice, low and urgent. "Don't turn around." You swallowed, breath trembling. Your reflection in the mirror shifted on its own. The half-formed face appeared behind you. Not your own, not the visitor, but something in between, watching, grinning, patient. It touched your shoulder, cold as marble. Your knees gave way. You fell to your hands and knees, clutching the floorboards. Every face in the wood grain, every warped reflection, every shadow of the house leaned closer. The voice rasped again, almost tenderly. "Now you belong. Now you see. Now you cannot leave." You tried to resist, tried to scramble backward, away from the mirror, away from the faces, away from the shadow. But the weight of the house pressed in, heavy as water, rooting you to the spot. The second breath fell perfectly in sync with your own, a cruel echo that would never leave. Your eyes flicked to the reflection, and you saw it. A being formed entirely from shadow and splintered wood, its face human enough to terrify you, smiling because it had been waiting centuries for this moment. Limbs bending impossibly, stretching across the room, eyes that knew every rule you had tried to follow, every whispered plea you had made. Then came the last words, almost a caress. "Welcome home." The house seemed to sigh. The floorboards creaked beneath every imagined weight. Dust swirled in a halo of cold light. And you understood. You'd belonged all along. You'd just never looked. When dawn broke, the bed was empty. Footprints marked the floor, 2 sets trailing toward the hallway mirror. But the mirror was blank. The faces in the wood grain were gone. The house waited. And somewhere, just beneath the ceiling, a slow, steady breath matched the rhythm of the morning wind.